Well, I'm going to say this first and foremost. Whoever is out there and trying to listen to interviews of this sort and who is like looking for outlets, listen to Alfonso because this is one of the best interviews I've ever had. These
Thank you.
questions have been
Thank you.
brilliant. I think that your read of things is super clear and really getting to the heart of things. And I am excited for other bands to have a chance to sit with you and talk about these things. So, this Retumba, is that right? What's the
Yeah. Yeah, Retumba.
Yeah, I'm gonna check it out literally just because I'm inspired by this interview. So I hope that other people check out the website. I'm really excited to share the album. I've never been this excited to share a piece of metal music that I've been a part of, I think, ever. Hopefully we can do it again with the silver record coming up. But yeah, I can't wait to share it with the world. It's been a long wait. I hope that people feel like it's worth it. And yeah, and I hope that people will share their thoughts with us. I'm really excited to just sit back and see what people think. It's been a long journey. So yeah, thank you for your attention to detail and just being willing to listen so closely.
So, hello, Alex. Hello, Damian. I know that you are here to discuss the new Horrendous album, which is due to be out the next August 18, and it's called Ontological Mysteries. Interesting name. I hope that we can discuss it later. But let's start with an icebreaker question, okay? And I ask you to please answer this individually. The reason for this is to know more about yourself in general. So, how was your first introduction to heavy music? I don't know, with which bands did you start it, and how is it related to making the decision to play an instrument and having a band?
Oh, it's a good question, and one that actually I don't know if I've ever been asked that question. Oddly enough, we've done a number of maybe something adjacent, but I can't recall. I can't recall being asked like this directly. Like, what was your first experience? I'm gonna classically answer in a staged way because I think that there was kind of like there were like gates that I had to travel through.
Yeah.
So when I was really young, I had like access to really small amounts of music. And I remember like my first two CDs were nowhere near heavy music. Like I think I got like an Offspring CD. I got like a Backstreet Boys CD. I was like 5 years old, like an actual fucking baby. But I remember shortly after that, sort of like getting into like popular punk music, and like I started hearing distorted guitars for the first time. And then I very quickly made friends with someone who would be like my best friend for a decade. This guy named Chris Kaler, and he was kind of like a goth kid, who was into like, I don't know, like, I can't even recall some of the band names, but like a lot of like hot topic bands is like kind of what I'm thinking of. But mixed in there were some metal bands. So like even though there was like this goth stuff, like maybe some like almost like dance music stuff, but there were these weird sort of like peppering into metal bands. And the bands I remember were like Lamb of God, Children of Bodom, some weird folk metal bands, some power metal bands that like his stepdad were really into. And I wasn't into it yet, but this stuff was like floating around me, right? Like I was hanging out with Chris is a little bit older than me. He was kind of like the guy I looked up to. So I was hearing all of this stuff, and then I just started learning that I liked metal music, and I started going to the CD store and just like picking out things from the metal section. There was also a local metal scene in my hometown, so I was going actually to see bands who were playing thrash, which is kind of like what I ended up getting really deep into, like as a teenager. But yeah, so I mean, that's early on. It was really just like hearing it from other people and being like totally enamored with like the feeling of heavy music like in my ears. But I hadn't quite really like developed a taste or anything yet. It was just kind of like accepting whatever was coming my way. So yeah, I think that's there's more to say, but that's kind of the beginning for me.
And for you, Damian?
Yeah, I think my first introduction to heavy music was through my oldest brother. He was into like a lot of like doom and gothy stuff. When I was a kid, even. So I remember him listening to like White Zombie or like My Dying Bride or I don't know, stuff like that. And so I feel like from an early age, I was kind of introduced to like more aggressive styles and like growling and stuff, because I feel like that's always a barrier for people to get over, even with heavy music.
Yeah.
And then he had some old tapes, like, I don't know, I remember listening to this like Iron Maiden live tape over and over. And then in high school, one of my friends introduced me to like In Flames, Nile, Children of Bodom. And then, yeah, just kind of like escalated from there. I realized that, you know, I really like this stuff. And then I just started exploring it on my own.
So this happened in the late 90s, early 2000s for you guys?
That would have been like the early 2000s for me, in terms of like getting into actual metal bands. Yeah.
So, Alex, your first conscious style of choice was thrash, right? Maybe?
Yeah, there was as I mentioned, like there was a small scene in my hometown of sort of Westchester, Downingtown, Ardmore, like all of these like suburbs outside of Philadelphia. And there was a School of Rock that used to let us, after the School of Rock was done. This is like, I don't know if you're familiar with School of Rock, but it's like a camp for kids learning how to play instruments. And they do like, you know, cover sets of famous bands from everything from like pop music to metal and everything. And when they were done at night, we used to have these shows. And there were these local bands in my area, Trasher, BSOM, touring bands would sometimes come and play. Like I remember seeing fucking like Impaled and like there's this band from Sweden that used to come by and play that I can't remember, like a heavy metal band. But regardless, thrash was really like my first obsession. Like I was listening to, that was like the music that I was sort of like diving down rabbit holes on. And I my first band ever was a thrash band. Just very boneheaded thrash. And yeah, but I was also getting a bunch of other stuff in my ears too. Like for some reason this memory sticks out in my head of going to FYE and buying a contemporary Overkill record, 3 Inches of Blood, Advance and Vanquish, and Nightside Eclipse, like in the same purchase. Like I walked out with an FYE bag with all of those, and I feel like that's like pretty symptomatic of where I was. Like I loved nerdy shit, I liked thrash, and I was also like trying to learn about like classic bands in any metal genre, like whenever I could, essentially.
And in the case of Damian, Horrendous was your first proper band?
I guess it depends how you define proper. I had like a high school band, but
I didn't know this.
Yeah, we played like our talent show, our Battle of the Bands, but it was actually entirely instrumental, and we played like not cover songs, but like we would cover riffs and sort of like blended into whole like songs. And then I had like a one-man project, because I was really into recording, and there weren't like a ton of people into metal at my school. So yeah, I started a one-man project sort of just as an outlet for my creativity. It was called Fields of Elysium, and I did one like album/demo, and then Horrendous was like my first like real band, I guess.
Or the most prosperous ones, let's say.
Yes, certainly that.
Well, what was it about, I don't know, being a fan of extreme music, being part of an audience of a show, or playing an instrument that make you decide to start emitting something out and make a connection from the other side of the music?
You mean like why?
This is for either for Alex or Damian. Yeah. So the question is, do you remember a particular experience, maybe listening to an album or like in a band, that make you decide to start emitting something out instead of just being the audience and start making your music?
I see. It's an easy one for me because it all goes back to this local scene.
Okay.
Like, I wish I could put you in my mind the first time I went to go see this band Trasher in my hometown at School of Rock. The place was fucking packed. Trasher was playing like riffs, guitar riffs I had never heard. They were young, they're older than me, but not by a ton. People were fucking stage diving, and it was like, it was like one of those things where like I played guitar at this point and I was doing a lot on my own, and I was sort of like teaching myself in the house and getting more into metal and stuff, and I was just like, oh, like if these kids can do it, like maybe I can too. But at the same time, I will say, and I'm curious what Damian's thoughts on this are, I don't remember ever having this feeling of being like, that's what I'm gonna do. You know what I mean? Like feeling some sort of like explicit pull to being like, that guy's a guitar player, that guy does this and that on stage. Like I want to be like that. Like it never really like went through my mind that way. It was just sort of like, it was such a communal experience that it kind of just like felt like it made sense for me to keep playing guitar. And I was lucky that I had friends who like wanted to try things out, and it was mostly just about like having fun, and so it wasn't like some kind of like personal revelation that was sort of like, I'm gonna be a metal musician or something. Like I just was super obsessed with music of all kinds, and like loved having my ears bent, and loved like trying things out on an instrument, and like fucking up and doing all kinds of like weird things. So it's just sort of like, I don't know, it's almost like childish play as opposed to sort of like an image of something that I wanted to like chase after, if that makes sense. But seeing these guys play as a young kid was definitely inspiring. Like it made it feel, the bigger stages feel far away. You know what I mean? They're like, well, that's fucking impossible. Like I'm not going to be able to, I can't do that. Like that's like for the rare, that's for like the 1%. Or whatever. But when your friends are playing on a stage and people are going ape shit, you're like, well, yeah, like, give me a couple months, I could probably do that too.
Nice.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting question. Again, I feel like I haven't really been asked that before. I think there was something, I already played guitar when I sort of discovered metal. And I think there was something about metal that was more like mysterious than other genres. It was less popular. It was often like faster and more technical. The lyrics were just like, I don't know, they just like intrigued me more. And like the general topics. So I think because of that like intrigue, it just sort of sparked my curiosity, and it made me want to explore like, would I be able to create something like this, or like how is this band creating this sound, and then that sort of just set me off on the path of like recording my own stuff and like seeing what I could come up with.
Well, just a brief side note, I was yesterday talking to Johannes Grossman of Alkaloid, and he mentioned that, as a kid, it's either you are the sports guy, or you find other ways to, I don't know, express yourself. And for him was music, like that, the way he channeled all of his energy. I guess that for you guys is also similar in that way.
Yeah, pretty much. I did try to play sports in the beginning. In the beginning of high school, but yeah, I shifted to music.
Well, he's getting back into it now, though.
That's true. Yeah.
Sorry?
Damian joined a street hockey team.
Oh.
Yeah.
Which is, nice. I just think it's so cool. I'm like such a fan of that.
Yeah. It is. Well, about Alkaloid, sorry, Horrendous. One of the tricks for what the band is known about is the way you approach, let's say, a classic understanding of heavy death metal music, while portraying your own vision on top of it. And often is hard to describe it, at least for me. It's familiar with some other names, maybe. I don't know, maybe in the energy or some parts. But in general, a more fair description would be that the band brings a lost era or the golden age to newer values or for newer generations that appreciate this kind of music. So my question is, how would you describe the objective for the band at the moment of starting it? And how do you understand the sound that you create nowadays under the banner of Horrendous?
Such good questions. You have to start this one, Damian, because you were at the beginning.
Yeah. Well, yeah. It's that has certainly changed since the beginning. I think in the beginning, I mean, it was just sort of like, well, Matt and Jamie, they're brothers, and then I was a friend, and it was just us sort of jamming and having fun. And the first material was like really trying to sort of recreate that classic death metal sound. But at the same time, like we started, I think we started expanding on it a bit, and that wasn't necessarily a conscious effort. I think it was more just like we just had different ideas for riffs, and that wouldn't necessarily sound like, they wouldn't fit on a classic death metal album necessarily, but we put them in anyway and didn't really care. And it ended up cool. And yeah, I think over time we've just become more comfortable with exploring and trying to create something unique. And yeah, I think on the most recent material, it's really just about like totally embracing what makes Horrendous unique. And there's like pretty much no boundaries when we're coming up with stuff or recording. We're trying to make the music exciting and fun and make sure that comes across in a recording, because that can be hard. And yeah, we're just like sort of exploring how we can explore this style, like come up with new things, but sort of like filtered through death metal in a way. Yeah, I don't know if you have more to add, Alex.
I think it's funny, like, obviously, you might, I don't know if you're aware of this or not, Alfonso, but I'm not an original member of the band. I've been with them for 7 years now. I keep trying to figure out like how long it's actually been, but a good while. But a lot of what Damian's saying in terms of like the beginning, right? Like though the sound has changed so much, I think there's like a attitude or like a general willingness to play around and to experiment within the sort of like field of the genre that remains true and is kind of like, I don't know, like a backbone of the way that we function as like a musical entity. But it's fun for me because like, you know, I have like a perception of the band. I had a perception of the band coming in, right? Sort of like as a listener who got asked to play with them early on. And then like what's happened since then in terms of like how we've all grown together and asked questions together and tried new things out. And I think you hit the nail on the head to some degree in terms of like, I think all four of us have like a set of core, or maybe even somewhat unspoken set of feelings about like what from the classic eras of metal, regardless of the style, right? Like heavy metal, right. Melodic death metal, the dirtiest of death metal, all these different things. Like we all sort of like have a sense of like the golden kernels of those projects and how they've aged since then, and sort of like the world that we live in now. And like at the end of the day, like we all really like playing together. We all really like exploring things. That Damian said it in a way I think is the clearest possible. Like we like exploring things like through a death metal lens or through a heavy metal lens, and like, and but you know, but also exploring as kind of like a baseline, right? And sort of being like, we like playing our instruments, we like pushing our abilities sometimes, we like trying to make things as larger than life as possible. And I think like, yeah, that's how the music made us, I think, collectively feel growing up. And we want to write music that like can affect people in the same way. So like, I don't know, I don't think the core objectives are like musically, like they don't really like fit in the realm of sort of like a musical terminology, as in some kind of like genre or style,
right.
Blah, blah, but it's kind of like I don't know, like an objective of spirit, an objective of attitude. And we've just like, yeah, I think on the most recent record too, we're just like pushing that as hard as we can and trying to be confident about it.
Yeah, I can see that it has become something unconscious in the way you write for this band. And for what it's worth, I think that it shows that this album, the band is more willing and more confident to push their own sound. I have a question on that, but do you, Alex, feel more comfortable on this album than in previous ones? Because your presence here is remarkable.
It's very kind. That means a lot. I do feel more confident. I really do. It took me a while to realize this. Having a lot of the conversations in interviews with people like yourself, and also now that the record's been turned in, and we also just went on tour together. We've been playing the songs. I've had time to reflect, you know.
Right.
And Idol was. I am super proud of that album, but at the same time, like I was nervous. I also was not necessarily sure. I didn't feel uncomfortable, but I think like deep in my psyche there was sort of like it was a tumultuous time for all of us in general, just like in life. But you know, like it was my first album with the band, and they have so much material behind them, and also these guys have written fucking fantastic bass lines on all of the records before I came. So it's like big shoes to step into, you know. Like I admire big time the bass lines on Ectasis and Honoretta particularly. So you know, there was a lot of sort of like, I said to Matt many times during that process, was like, maybe this record's going to come out and everyone's going to be like, this sucks, and guess whose fault it is? This guy. So like, that was lingering in the back of my head. I think I overplayed on that album almost, not consciously, but just like, you know, like I'm playing these parts live sometimes and I'm like, why didn't anyone stop me? Like someone should have like told me to slow down or something. But on this record, I felt like I was really happy with like the way that I was able to, or the way I was permitted to meld the stuff that I liked with the band, with Idol. And then on this record, sort of like, I don't know, it felt more fun. It felt like the sky was the limit. I felt less concerned that I need to like prove something, or that like I can fit into the mold. And like, again, these weren't things I was consciously thinking about, but just like, looking back, I feel like this was in my consciousness to some degree. And this one, it just sort of felt like I don't know, like I didn't feel afraid. And when I did feel afraid, I would send what I was working on, because I did record a lot of my parts remotely, like to the guys, and like they'd reassure me, you know, like this is fucking great, like this is awesome. And like, yeah, I don't know, I just felt like I had more room to kind of just like be myself and not worry about stepping into a role this time around, which also meant that I could like maybe push things a little bit and like take some risks, because it's sort of like, well, I'm in the band now, so you're stuck. Yeah. You know, you're stuck with it.
You're allowed to make mistakes, if anything.
Yeah. And I did along the way, for sure. And that's like part of it, like comfortably making mistakes too, just being like, guess I got to record this whole song again because this sucked, you know.
Well, in the press sheets, I think Jamie wrote about evolving also as music listeners. And I find that interesting because this is one of the very few times that I see a band recognizing it as being part of the process also, even just by mention. So how would you say your evolution as music listeners has permeated to your writing material over the years? but also the role that it played for this album in particular. Like, do you allow your newer influences to have a place in Horrendous at all?
Yeah, I guess one thing is like, I think no matter what, when you listen to music, there's like an osmosis, and it influences what you end up writing. So I think it's sort of inevitable that as your musical taste evolves, you're gonna start writing different stuff. I remember on, like, for example, Ectasis, at the time, like, I started, for whatever reason, like, getting more into like hair metal and like glam and stuff. And I think a little bit of that shows through. And I feel like that's the first album where we sort of started like trying to make things like large. And obviously that continued on, but I don't know, that's just what springs to mind at the moment. I'm sure you have good stuff to say, Alex.
I mean, it's funny. I'm in a weird position with this question, just because like I've been talking a lot about how I feel like now my music listening habits are like declining. Like I'm getting like I think it's just partially because of being so busy with musical projects that like my ears are exhausted and like my life's kind of in a little bit of a wreck currently. So, but zooming out of my current moment and thinking larger along the lines that Damian is talking about, this is I just want to say as like a preliminary thing, like when I was just listening to Pedro Martin's record, this Radio Mysterio record. It's like a jazz fusion album. Crazy guitar player. I think it's from Brazil. And you know, when I listen to that, it isn't filtered through like a different brain than when I hear Anthems of the Welcome at Dusk. You know, like it's all, this has been this way like ever since I was a kid for reasons that I can't really fully understand. Like I just like, it's all just sonic information and it's going into my ears and I'm like sort of synthesizing it using the same set of like interests and things that I'm pulled towards. And I think the longer I've been with Horrendous and the longer we all play together, it feels to me the more like that sort of like boundaryless approach in terms of like the fact that everything we're working with, even though it might be through distorted guitars or it might be through a metal lens or whatever, is sort of like pulling from wherever all the time. And I think maybe on this record that shows the most out of anything that we've done. And it's in small details, and I don't want to like get so honed in that it's like hard to understand, but there's a track on the record called Neon Leviathan that is like a super wild song. It's very like snaky and fast, but there's this like, I always think of the one drum beat in the song almost like a funk beat, and it feels very funky to me. It's kind of like, it's got this like 4 on the floor feel to it, even though it's like wrapped up in an odd time signature and there's all this crazy shit happening. And it reminds me that Jamie and I, as like a rhythm section, are like super into all of this like rhythm section heavy music that is not metal. Like obviously metal is a rhythm section heavy genre in general, but like jazz, funk, you know, like weird prog music where like the bass and the drums are doing like something crazily different from the rest of the instruments in the band. And whenever Jamie and I play, like when we're warming up, I always feel like we're in this territory of like playing like non-metal, almost like weird rhythm section music, like just trying to come up with like grooves together. And I feel like, I don't know, this is a very long way of trying to say that I think that a lot of the listening that has nothing to do with metal is more permitted than ever to sort of like leak into the instrumentation in the band. And it's like, and I think everyone's down with that. It's sort of kind of like the fact that we are a metal band does not close the gate to us sort of like bringing in all of these different elements that we love that come from different realms of our lives. And everyone does that in different ways. And like, even down to Damian's like finger style chops, which like maybe not even a lot of people know about, that like guy's got like fucking classical fingernails on his right hand, you know, and that stuff comes into the music like all the time. And it's, yeah, I don't know. I think we're open to all of it.
Yeah, I think that regardless of your vision as musician or as artist, is healthy or important to stay or to broaden your scope of references, even if you don't put them in your music, but to be there, subconsciously. I want to talk about the visual identity of Horrendous that is represented throughout all of the album covers. There's a consistency there, working with the same artist, represented a similar presence with a school and a surreal aspect to it. Also having a defining color scheme for each artwork. So my question is, how involved is the band in the result of the album covers that we have seen? And if do you give some sort of direction for each album, I don't know, in terms of colors to represent the topics?
Yeah, so, well, I guess maybe just to give some background. So after the Chills, so starting with Ectasis and then Anaretta, Idol, and now Ontological Mysterium, it's all been the same artist, and his name is Brian Smith. And it's kind of a funny story because I sort of just like randomly found one of his paintings on Google Images one day when I was trying to find an artist for what ended up being Ectasis, and I saw this painting that really struck me, and did some research and figured out it was on this guy Brian Smith's website, and so I contacted him, and for whatever reason he was like, he had never done an album cover before, but he was willing to work with us. I don't know why, but he was. And then strangely enough, he's sort of like continued to only work with us and sort of doesn't accept commissions from other bands. We don't know why, but we feel fortunate for that. But yeah, it's funny. He's like, I remember for Ectasis, we gave him some ideas, just sort of based on his previous work, and it was our first time working with him. But then with Anaretta, we didn't really give him like any direction, and same with Idol. For both of those, we ended up picking a painting that he had already made, and even for Ontological Mysterium, we ended up picking something he had already painted before. But it was perfect because we did sort of want, like as you mentioned, the color scheme. We wanted this new one to be a little different, and we hadn't like done a red themed album before, so that was kind of like a loose idea for it, but yeah, I don't know.
Well, this time the biggest difference in terms of how the artwork is represented are the three faces on the album cover instead of just one, and there's this concept or religious belief about the human trichotomy, which established that the perfect or complete being consists of body, spirit, and soul. So is there a connection there with the mystery of being, or the ontological mystery concept of the album, and the three entities on the album cover?
Yeah, definitely. One of the reasons we like the cover is that it does depict, it's not just three faces, but they're all sort of like morphing into one another, and they're in sort of different stages of development. So it shows an evolution, and I think that really represents not only this album, but sort of our trajectory as a band.
Okay.
It shows just the progression we've made of sort of, I feel, coming into our own and embracing what makes us unique. And Yeah, I don't know. Alex, do you have more to say? I feel like I've been talking a lot about the cover.
I wanted you to cover ground while you still had time.
Oh, that's okay.
Yeah, I also want to address the consistency in the music, which is represented in a way that we can recognize the horrendous sound and the general vibe, but we can't also talk about disregarding the previous one for the sake of the follower. So yeah, how conscious is this movement from album to album to evolve, but also respect the legacy on the previous one?
This is also something that I feel like I read into the cover too, and Damian was pointing out, right, that these three entities also they blend into each other, right? They're not only distinct, but they do blur into each other, and also it goes both ways, right? Like you can see it left to right in a pure evolutionary way, which is true in terms of where we're at as a band. And you can also sort of look at it in terms of like, you know, the one face, the most developed and sort of and complex face, like can't exist without having sort of these ghastly connections to the things that it's traveled through. And I sort of think about in terms of like the mind, body, soul thing, right? Like those are all things that are also blurrily connected, right? As opposed to being purely distinct. So I do think that that's important, and I think that that's something that we recognize in the image and something that we recognize in the band as well. That is sort of like all parts of the band are present, even if it seems like we've come a far, far away from 15 years ago.
Well, perfect. Time's running out. I will give me a couple of minutes and I will send you a new link. Damian, thank you for being here, and I hope to talk to you next time. Okay?
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So I also want to address, like I mentioned before, the consistency in the music, which the band has grown in a way that, yes, each album can be seen as different and its own thing. But at the same time, at least for me and my experience, I can't pick a new one as a favorite or the previous one as a favorite because they all have something different to offer. But at the same time, it's consistent, with showing evolution. But in particular, this record, I will say that the band has a more experimental approach as a whole. And yeah, the experience is very much different while still retaining the signature of the band. So yeah, what's your take on that?
Yeah, this is really interesting. Again, I don't know if anyone has like fully ever felt sort of like, I don't know, what sounds like a spiritual consistency across the records. This is an interesting question for me to answer just because of like my unique perspective of being in between, like wedged perfectly in between. So here's sort of like my take on the trajectory of the band, right? Like the Chills kind of stands on its own for me, right? Like it's the most old school death metal album. It has hints and whispers of sort of what's to come, maybe on Ectasis and beyond, but it's kind of like, like the most old school death metal of all of the records. Ectasis is the moment in which everyone starts to embrace sort of like the fact that heavy metal is like crucial to the spirit of all forms of metal, right? Like, and I'm talking like Iron Maiden, Dio, Judas Priest, the classic metal bands, Black Sabbath, beyond. And, and we're like, okay, we can incorporate all of that into this formula. We can play this sort of like Swedish inflected death metal style or whatever, but we can also have high-flying guitar melodies. We can play doomy parts. We can have sort of like harmonized melodies on top of all of these different things. So that's kind of like where the band starts to see like, the horizon of experimentation within this formula is kind of like open. And it kind of goes, but it's still at the very beginning. Honoretta pushes that to the next level, and it's sort of like, I feel like the first time the band has like full sort of like control of the reins of what it means to mix all of these things together, right? And like, I mean, I love both of those records very much, but I think Honoretta sort of like holds up as a complete piece in a way that is like, I don't know, like more fully formed, which is just natural, right? This is just time in terms of like a unit slowly developing their sound and learning how to stretch it. I'm giving a very, very long answer for this, but and then I came in for Idol and we've been working together since then. And I think, I don't know, this goes back to your first comment. I think this is the easiest way to answer this question. There's a consensus about, you mentioned something about like an awareness of the golden era of the music, right? Which like, I hesitate to even call anything a golden era necessarily. But, like if that's such a thing, like if there are things that are sort of like bar-setting qualities of metal music, like that's been on everyone's mind from the beginning. We just have wanted to be able to execute that aspect of the music and not destroy any possibility of trying things that are maybe outside of that music's bounds. Heavy metal or black metal or death metal is all great, but at the end of the day, sometimes it feels like they have their limits, and they're limits that I don't think any of us are really interested in as musical people. So I think if there is a continuity to be had, it goes back to that. It's like that has something to do with it.
Yeah, definitely. And in my experience, from my perspective of the band, is that yes, we can talk about being innovative in its own regard, but preserving certain values of the classic era of death metal, heavy metal, in a way that it doesn't detach so much from the origin of the sound, but at the same time it pushes forward the sound as a whole. And I think this is something very distinct of the band, and something that at least my friends that are fans of Horrendous have to say. Like, there's not many bands doing things like this. You can think of bands that are innovative or even avant-garde in extreme metal, but almost detached entirely of the way that is presented in music over the years. And there's also newer bands, fresh off the boats bands, that sort of want to pay homage to that era but doesn't have necessarily something to offer. So I think Horrendous stands in the middle just perfectly, and which each album we have come to realize the vision of the band. And I want to ask you about the first time you encountered the name of Horrendous, because personally it was with the second album, 2014. And by that point, I was still discovering music, like much of it. I think we have similar age. I don't know, but
29.
Yeah, I'm 30. So,
okay.
Yeah, I think this band arrives for me at the right point, because I was like, oh, I like the sound of the band. It's very peculiar, but I can't point my finger in it as to what is that make it this band special. But each album, like, okay, yeah, I see now. But this record in particular is like the most clearest, crystallized version of what the band has to offer. But I don't know if this was consequential or not. But yeah, what was the first?
And when you say, you mean the new record?
Yeah, the new record.
Well, I will tell you, there are mosquitoes in my room, sorry. But it means a lot to hear that, because I think, we feel that way. And it isn't always the case that you feel that way about your own music, for one. And it's also not always the case where you feel that way about your own music and other people are telling you this as well. So that tells me that something good is happening between us, which is fantastic. But I will, maybe this will make sense to you to some degree, because I can tell you about the first time that I heard the music and what it was like for me to hear it at specifically the point of life that I heard it, which was a very strange transitional period for me. I met Matt in a coffee shop because I used to serve him breakfast. Him and his ex-girlfriend used to live down the street from a coffee shop where I was working. I had just dropped out of college for the first time around, and I was specifically studying jazz in college, and I was doing a lot of improvised music. I was playing experimental music here in Philadelphia. I was doing a lot of weird things to my guitar that people probably shouldn't do to their guitars ever. I was, like experimenting a lot. And to be honest, I had pretty little interest in listening to and playing heavy music at this era of my life. And this was 7 years ago. I was sort of trying to... The only serious things I had done up until this point were metal related, and I was really interested in this other world, and I was trying really hard to get into it, and was also trying to maybe prove something at the time. And I met Matt, and he liked the music I was playing, some like Mingus, Charles Mingus on the speakers, and he was wearing a Voivod t-shirt. Mm-hmm. And we met, and we did the whole like, oh, you're a musician, we should play sometime. He actually hit me up and came over to my house, and we like jammed, totally not on metal stuff, just like doing whatever. And I didn't know he had a band. He like sort of like shrugged it off at the time. And this was like around the time that Honoretta came out, which was a huge album, mind you. Yes. And Matt was being very shy about this. And about a year later, he hit me up being like, hey, like, we have this gig coming up and we're starting to play with a bass player, because they used to not play with a bass player at all. And the person we were using before can't do this one. Would you be willing? And of course I was like, the show was at a venue at Philly I'd always wanted to play. It was I knew it was going to be a big show, and I was like, yeah, this would be great. And then he sent me the music. And imagine putting Honoretta on and hearing and being a person like me who grew up like loving death, like loving like the kind of metal music that does exactly what we're talking about, sort of pays homage to things that have come before it, but is also trying to travel its own path, and is like super groovy and like, very sort of like, like brainy but not technical, Yeah. And so I'm sitting there listening to these songs, and I'm like, I love this music so much. Like, I was such a fan right off the bat. So it was like, all of a sudden, like, getting asked to do a favor got turned into like, wait a second, like, not only this is like the kind of metal that I wanted to be able to make as a kid, but I didn't really know anyone who was interested in this crossroads of metal, right? It was either like people wanted to play thrash or punk. They didn't really want to play like sort of like, I don't know, like forward-thinking metal music. That wasn't really something that was in my purview. I had some friends, but never like a unit of people. And I realized all of the jazz and improvising and all of the sort of like spontaneous stuff that I was really into was going to work perfect with this band, because there's so much space. And if you're someone who has a certain amount of knowledge on the instrument, the kinds of riffs and the kinds of sections that they write, there's all this space to play with. So all this to say, when I heard the music for the first time, it reignited so much of why I grew up a metalhead. Like so much about the music that inspired me and pushed me as a musician, and like, yeah, and that became, I don't know, like a new love affair in my life. Like, I'm a bigger metalhead now, maybe, than I was when I was 15. And I was pretty much exclusively a metalhead when I was 15. So, that was my experience. It was kind of like an invigorating experience for me. And in the same way that you were talking about, I think that it came to me at the right time. I think that, like...
Most definitely.
It was sort of like there was something waiting for me, and it appeared at the right moment, and it literally changed my life. So...
Yeah. It came at the right cross point in your life. Well, about the album in particular, like I mentioned before, I think that for the way that each song starts, you can tell that this album has broadened up the parameters that the band has previously set on records. And, well, in my opinion, before I could have focused on just 2 or 3 tracks to pick as favorites. But this time, to be honest, there's so much specifics with each song that it's hard to just focus on one in particular. It's more coherent as a whole experience. So I say this is great because the band, it shows that the band has become better in making an album complete as an experience while also making each track to stand on its own. In my theory for this record is that the order of the tracks can be rearranged and it doesn't change much because it's about, the fluctuations of each song, no? Or finding out what you like the most. So yeah, to have a question on this, what's your take on that?
Yeah, this is fascinating to hear, and I really think you're tuned into some really special things here, and it's giving me a lot of hope and excitement for the record to come out for other people, because these are all things that we talked about. We experimented with track lists forever. We must have listened to 10 or 12 different versions. There was even a version of the record, I don't know if this has been said on record, and I'm just going to lay it out there anyway. There was a version of this record that had sentenced the decibel. We did a single for the Decibel Flexi series many years ago.
Okay.
I re-recorded bass parts for Sentenced and then added some guitar magic during the break in that song. And that song was actually on the record for a while. So not only did we remove a song, but we took all of these songs and moved them around in all different ways. And I think, though we have not acknowledged this directly, I think that part of the reason it was so difficult is because there are many different possibilities for this album. And I think ultimately the one we settled on was just sort of the one that said the statement we wanted to say, not necessarily the best one, right? It was sort of there are certain reasons that we decided to put certain songs in certain places, but not because they couldn't go anywhere else, but just because of where we're at as a band and the kind of feeling that we want to leave people with. That's just why we decided on the order. So yeah, all this to say, I think your comment is spot on, and it shows because we could barely decide on a track list to begin with. It was very difficult.
I want to mention just some of my favorite songs, and I can't really point out why at this moment. I have been listening to the album maybe 5 times, no less than that. But the songs are Cries.
This one's hard.
Yeah,
Cries of Apoya, track number 2, Aurora Neotérica, Cult of Shadaoa, Ex Genesis, and the last one. So the last one is very peculiar. I think it's the right ending because just the way it's introduced with these vocals reminded me of Megadeth to some degree.
I wish Matt was here to hear you say that, man. That would blow him away. He's a huge Megadeth fan.
And do you have any particular song that you like?
Oh boy, it's tough for sure, because I agree with you that I think that there is something that I just adore about every track, but a couple of things. I'm just going to be 100% supremely biased here. Chris Apoya is one of my favorites on the record, just because I feel somewhere deep inside all of us, we wanted to do kind of this rock opera kind of song, something that's a little bit longer in length. The Blaze is kind of that was originally all part of the same song. We just figured it sounded like an intro, so it sort of deserved its own track. But I just love I love how I feel listening to Chris Apoya is being at the top of a mountain and seeing 360 degrees all around you. You know, where it's sort of literally the limit of your eyesight is the limit, but you can see so many different things, and so I love that song for that reason. Also, Neon Leviathan is a track that I had a very heavy hand in writing. It's probably the most I've contributed to a Horrendous composition in the history of the band, which I don't think anyone knows that. This is the first time I'm saying that out loud. But I just love, like, there's a lot of things about the tonality of the riffs in that song that I've always wanted to use for Horrendous, and I finally got to do it. And we got to like meld sort of like, when I'm playing by myself, whether it be guitar or bass, like I play a lot of things that are kind of like in this realm, like it's kind of like spastic and kind of like very angular. And I was like so excited about the way we were able to blend groove, like funkiness, and sort of like the kind of like twisted brain nature of the riffs. So I'm very proud of that song, and I think that like it achieved something that the band's never done before. So that song. I also love Exogenesis because it's the most. I love that you mentioned the two sort of like, you know, interlude tracks, because like they feel like realizations of like a musical spirit that we're all super into. Like we play stuff like that when we're jamming a lot, and we've never been able to get it on record. So to be able to sort of like bake that part of our musical selves into a death metal album feels like really exciting. But yeah, I could say something about every song, you know, like
and that's my point. You can say much of each song, but it's hard to summarize the whole thing.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I want to ask you about the silver.
Yeah, please.
In 2021, we and a friend spoke with Enrique in Spanish, of course, and we have a whole conversation about the album. And so it's nice to have you here to maybe discuss if there's something in the future for the band, because I heard a single a couple of days on Decibel, and
so there's definitely a future for the band. We are on the cusp of recording a new album this month.
Nice.
I don't know if that is public information or not, but I mean, I think,
whatever.
Yeah, I really don't think it matters. I think that I hope that the people that care about the band are excited. It'll be obviously my first record with the band. I've been playing live guitar with them since the first show, but the single for the Flexi series was the first song I recorded and wrote parts for, and now we are deep in the process of trying to prepare for this new record. I am really excited for it. I think, again, like as I feel with everything I've worked on with Matt and Jamie, it's a special bunch of tunes that are offering something, again, I don't think a lot of other bands are offering, especially on the new album. I'm nervous to record. I haven't recorded a metal record on guitar in full in a very long time, despite being a guitar player my whole life. So it's gonna put me to the test, I think. Probably after this interview is done, I'm gonna go practice parts for the silver.
Nice.
But yeah, there's definitely things on the horizon. I know everyone is very excited to get their record done, and I would say just keep your eyes peeled, and we'll have something new for you soon.
And this band, besides the members, shares some similarities with the vision of Horrendous, as we discussed before, like something sort of vintage about it, but also like very new, very I don't know, something that you don't listen everywhere, and that's special. And I think that this is what it's about. The at least as a fan, as enthusiast, and someone who likes to actively try to discover new things, new bands, new sounds, I think this is the most rewarding thing for us. So I hope the new record has some of that and builds up on that as well. I want to ask you, just in general, how are you as a music enthusiast these days? So for that, what would you say are your current, most recent, the things that you like the most these days? New bands that you discovered?
Musically? Yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, I feel like I'm at sort of like some kind of midlife musical crisis or something. where I'm listening less, and my curiosity is waning in ways that I don't like. Like I'm not proud of it. It's just something that's sort of happening. I think, however, I've recently, very recently, and I mean like just within the last couple of weeks, have had like a little bit of a reinvigoration, because I was in Arizona with my bandmates from a different project that is as far outside of the metal realm as you could be. But some of my favorite musicians on the planet. I play in this band called Pulgas. Pulgas, that's the Spanish word for flea.
It's a Spanish word for what, sorry?
For fleas, I think. Pulgas?
Bogus.
Here, I should... My pronunciation is terrible. I'm going to type it. Pulgas? Pulgas? Pulgas?
Pulgas. Yes, yeah. Sure. Yeah, please.
Yes. So I've been playing with them for almost a decade now. There's Zane Shields is the drummer, and this amazing guitar player named Simon Martinez. He plays with Derek Hodge. He plays with Jasmine Sullivan. He's one of the most incredible musicians I've ever known. Same with Zane, a drummer who plays in a way that I've never heard in my life. And we were just in Arizona for a week, recording together, actually, for a record. We were in the desert recording outside, recording with detuned instruments and weird drums and sounds that we could find. And he actually turned me on. I'm at a place where I'm really fascinated by like subtle musics. So like things that are made with like minimal materials that sound really odd, maybe like are kind of like put you in kind of like a trance state. I feel like I'm entering kind of like my like weirdly atmospheric like or like ambient like stage of life, which I've always liked music like that, but it's been like I've been diligently listening to stuff in this realm as of recently. I've been really into James Ferraro. This is all stuff I got from Simon. There's a band called Monopoly Child Star Searchers, they're also making sort of this like very creepy kind of like psychologically mind-bending minimal music. I also recently was really I mentioned the Radio Mysterio, that Pedro Martin's record, which has been kind of just perking my ears up lately. But yeah, my listening habits are not great, so I haven't been listening as much. Did you just typed something in the chat? Is this something you've been listening recently?
Yes, it comes out this Friday, and it's about the things that you're mentioning, the subtle ambience and sort of music without form, and more about the aura, the atmosphere, but so many elements there that I think you will find interesting.
Whoa, are they from?
3 parts: Japan, Russia, and United States.
Whoa, cool.
Anonymous band. Hopefully you will like it.
Wait, they're on Season of Mist? Or at
maybe
least...
distribute it?
Yeah, they're distributing. Yeah. Wow, I can't wait. I pulled it up and I'm looking at the page and reading the reading the description, and I can already tell this is gonna... They
are very psychedelic, and this brings me to the psychedelic vibe of this album. I don't know if it's intended as such, but yeah, there's something special about this album in particular. I mean, I will have to review it at some point with some other friends on the blog, but I don't know what I will say. But the psychedelic aspect of this album is also huge. You know, it's not on your face, but it's, at least for me, like very, it resonates with me to some degree.
You mean the Sentient Ruin record?
No, this album.
The Horrendous record?
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, I was just making sure because I was reading like krautrock psychedelic in the descriptions of Sentient Ruin. But I will say, although perhaps not, again, you might, not to sound like a broken record, but there's a lot of things that are subconscious with the band and not necessarily like we're gonna be psychedelic, blah, or whatever. But this is also something that we're all super into. Matt and Jamie love krautrock and psychedelic musics. I don't know anyone who knows more about like Tangerine Dream and like Gong and things like that than Matt and Jamie do. I love that music too. A big Can fan and things of that nature. So I think that, like, again, with the band being more confident to sort of like do whatever we feel like doing, all of those different listening experiences and sort of like things that we would like to try to experiment with ourselves are just leaking in. And I think like this is part of the reason we went with the album cover too. I remember like there were arguments about what we wanted to do for the album cover or what we wanted to use. And I know that one of the arguments was like, well, I feel like this has this kind of psychedelic feel to it a little bit in the artwork, and I think that that's present in the music, so it fits. So I think that you're spot on. It's like you said, it's not like overwhelmingly psychedelic necessarily, but there's kind of like a specter of psychedelic sense in there, and I think that like I think that's what we wanted, because we want the music to intoxicate people a little bit, you know, like metal should be intoxicating, and I think like a little bit of psychedelic energy makes it just easier for a listener to get to that place, you know.
For sure. Okay, another question is, if you could relate or assimilate, just for the sake of answer this question, this album in particular, the concept, the ideas, to another piece of work that already exists, like a movie, a painting, or a book, which one would it be and why?
Ooh, boy. I really wish I had backup on this one. This is tough. This is tough. I'm looking over on my bookshelf because I'm a big poetry nerd. I read a lot of poetry. I particularly read a lot of experimental poetry, or poetry, if not experimental on purpose, poetry whose language is, you know, sort of odd or off the beaten path. And, you know, it's hard because I feel like the record like builds me up and breaks me down at the same time when I listen to it as a person. And I don't necessarily know of a lot of pieces right off the bat that do that to me, but for some reason, and this isn't going to make any sense, but
it doesn't have to be.
It's one of those things where you just have to like listen to your instincts. For some reason, Cesar Vallejo's Trilce comes to mind.
Okay.
And the reason is because the language, at least in translate, I've never read it in the original. I wish that I could read Spanish so that I could do so. But there's something about the language that is simultaneously so familiar and so alienating, and it's also like kind of terrifying. And I feel like in terms of like merging the old and the new or whatever, or like the backward forward thing, that comes to mind. And also the title is like a made up word that I think like fuses two Spanish words together. And there's something about the feeling that I got from reading, because I've read Trilce from front to back, which is a mind flipping thing to do in general. And yeah, I wonder if sort of like Ontological Mysterium, what that means, you know, in terms of like an unsettled ontology of sorts. I think that Vallejo is kind of a person who exists linguistically in an unsettled place, and a slightly unsettling place. I think it's missing the triumphant quality that the record has. There's something inspiring about the album that Vallejo I think is much more depressing than Ontological Mysterium is. But I don't know. I really have to think about this one. I know that I only have this one chance and I'm blowing it, but
no, not at all. But the thing about this question is that there's somewhere something lurking in the back of your mind, like visually, that doesn't have to make sense necessarily with the thinking question. But about Cesar Vallejo's, I will suggest you to listen to a band from France, a French band called Hypnose. They they use poems by him in like in a cinematic way. Not very much, but it's there.
Whoa. He didn't. You said
he knows, but a 5 instead of a S. I send you the name.
Okay. Because this I have to know. But you sound like you're familiar with Vallejo's poetry too.
I can't defend myself on that matter, really. That's the name of the band.
Are you a poetry person?
Not at all, really, not at all. Just briefly encounters with it. For example, this other Argentinian poet, which wrote the El lado oscuro del corazón. I don't know how it's translated to English. The dark side of the heart.
Who wrote this?
Let me circle back and
Fine.
Yeah, I don't remember the name at this point.
Dark side of the heart. Alicia Subiela? There's a movie about it. Sorry, this is what happens. I'm very, very, very interested.
Maybe you know the poet because it's very famous.
Yeah. Okay, I'm aware of the time too.
Yeah, well, one final question and a stupid one that I have to ask.
I'm sure it's not stupid. You haven't asked a single stupid question yet.
This one it is, on purpose. Is it always sunny in Philadelphia?
Unfortunately, no. In fact, Philadelphia can be a very trying place. But I mean, it's sunny as hell right now. It's been hot as hell. So, and I have been enjoying it. So, it's yeah, you know, and they didn't even shoot that show in Philadelphia.
Yeah. But well, I like that show. I like the humor in it.
Yeah.
So that's the first time I get to ask this question. So I have to take my chance.
Yes, I'm happy to have given you the chance. And,
yeah, well, so time is running out. If you have anything more to say to anyone who is watching this, please, the floor is yours.
Well, I'm going to say this first and foremost. Whoever is out there and trying to listen to interviews of this sort and who is like looking for outlets, listen to Alfonso, because this is one of the best interviews I've ever had. These questions have been brilliant. I think that your read of things is super clear and really getting to the heart of things. And I am excited for other bands to have a chance to sit with you and talk about these things. So this Retumba, is that right? What's the
Retumba.
Yeah, I'm gonna check it out. Literally just because I'm inspired by this interview. So I hope that other people check out the website. I'm really excited to share the album. I've never been this excited to share a piece of metal music that I've been a part of, I think, ever. You know, hopefully we can do it again with the silver record coming up. But yeah, I can't wait to share it with the world. It's been a long wait. I hope that people feel like it's worth it. And yeah, and I hope that people will share their thoughts with us. I'm really excited to just sit back and see what people think. It's been a long journey. So yeah, thank you for your attention to detail and just being willing to listen so closely.
Well, I enjoy the music, and so hence that reason that I sitting here and taking the time to properly discuss the art form of it, because I believe very much in the art form of it. And well, it was nice to talk to you, and I hope to talk to you again for the Silver Cycle. Okay?
Yeah, please reach out to us on Instagram. You can reach out to us directly even. You don't have to necessarily go through Will. And I would love to be able to follow you and follow the platform.
Yeah, I will search your Instagram to yeah.
Cool. Sounds good. Thank you so much.